everybody. We're so excited to have you. Today's program is part of the Presidential Primary Sources Project, and our program today is Theodore Roosevelt's First Family, being presented by the Theodore Roosevelt Center at Dickinson State University. The Presidential Primary Sources Project is a partnership between Internet2, the National Archives, and the National Park Service. It's a series we do every year from January to the beginning of April, every Tuesday and Thursday. This is just a quick reminder, by participating today, you are agreeing to be recorded, archived, and streamed. We do keep recordings of all of our programs on our YouTube channel so that students and teachers can access them whenever they need to. All right, we absolutely want you to participate today. It's so much more fun if you participate. That said, just a few expectations. If you're participating via video, you can kind of come up to the front and raise your hand and we will call on you. If you want to be on video and you are not already on video, you can drop something in the chat and I will promote you to a panelist so that you can share your video. If you want to participate just via audio, just with your voice, you can use the little raise hand function in Zoom. It's like a little red hand, and we will call on you and help you unmute. And then of course there's the chat box. So if you haven't already found the chat box, looks like a little caption bubble, go ahead and click into that. We will use that a lot throughout the presentation as well. Again, participate a lot. It's so much more fun if you're participating. That said, please be very respectful of our chat box and our interactive tools. We want to make sure that we are only using them to address specific thoughts and questions related to what our presenter is speaking about. All right, and with that, I just want to thank you again for joining. We're so excited to have you. This is our website. You can see our future presentations there, as well as you can access our recordings. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing and pass it over to Erik, the person you came to see.
All right, looks like I'm unmuted and I will start sharing my screen. Everyone should be able to see that now. Hello, everyone. Greetings from North Dakota. My name is Erik Johnson, and I am one of the digital library catalogers here at the Theodore Roosevelt Center at Dickinson State University. How's everyone doing today? Give me a quick thumbs up if you're on video, or just a quick message in the chat just to make sure that you know where it is. And to see if I know where it is. Hold on. There we go. Excellent. I see some messages popping up, see some thumbs up on the screen. Awesome. Well, I am excited to be here to talk to you a little bit about Theodore Roosevelt and take a look at some of the primary sources we have. Good, we keep having messages coming in the chat. That's awesome. Great to hear that everyone's starting off the day well. Before we get started, I just want to say that I'll try to have some time at the end to answer any questions you might think of. So if you hear something you want to know more about, or if you have any questions about Theodore Roosevelt in general, hang on to those and I will do my best to answer them at the end. We'll do that using the video or using the chat, which we've been able to find. If you think of something after the fact, after I'm all done, I'll also show a link to the Theodore Roosevelt Center's website where you can send any questions you think of later. We are always happy to help people looking to learn more about Theodore Roosevelt. Since I mentioned our website, I suppose I should give you just a little background about where I work before I really get started. The Theodore Roosevelt Center is a digital library that works to collect and digitize any and all documents related to Theodore Roosevelt, the 26th President of the United States. The bulk of our materials are from the Library of Congress's collection of Theodore Roosevelt's papers, but we also work with a lot of other places and people across the country who have an interest in Roosevelt. This includes Harvard University, where Roosevelt attended college, national park sites either related to or created by Roosevelt, public libraries, historical societies, and even individual collectors who have Roosevelt-related materials. While some of our materials are available online in other places, our goal is to bring all these items together in one virtual collection and make them easier to find and be used by researchers, scholars, and students like you. So with that out of the way, let's get started on what I'd like to talk to you about today. I hope you I hope you can't hear vacuuming. I'm doing this from my apartment, I have to say, which is one of the great things about the Theodore Roosevelt Center is that since it's online, you can access these documents anywhere. But sometimes there might be a little background noise. So I apologize if that comes through. So talking about Theodore Roosevelt's first family, what do you think it would be like to suddenly be famous? Do you think it might be fun to have everyone paying attention to you? Or do you think it would get annoying and that you'd want some privacy? What I'm going to talk to you about today is what it was like. I see Hazley Elementary thinks it would be weird. I agree. What I'm going to talk to you about today is what it was like for Theodore Roosevelt and his family when he was president. Now, Miles Irby agrees weird, Edgewood intermediary annoying. Sounds like people think it would not be so much fun. I think you'll see that there was a little bit of a balance in the Theodore Roosevelt family, but by and large, I think you might find you'll agree. But we'll go through the presentation. We'll see what you think at the end. I'll ask it again. So keep that in your head. So depending on how much you know about Theodore Roosevelt, you might know he was actually first elected as vice president to President William McKinley. It wasn't until after McKinley was shot and died in September of 1901 that Roosevelt was suddenly thrown into the presidency. As you can probably imagine, this was a major change. Ooh, Andy thinks it would be fun. Excellent. As you can imagine, this was a major change, not only for him, but for his wife, his kids, and the nation as a whole. When Roosevelt came to the presidency, he was only 42 years old, making him the youngest person ever to be president of the United States. What's more, he also had a big family. While other presidents had had kids while they were in office, Roosevelt's 6 children, who you can see here in this picture, ranging from 17-year-old Alice all the way to just barely 4-year-old Quentin, presented a spectacle that enthralled the public and attracted the attention of the press. At the same time, Roosevelt's family was used to what had been a relatively private existence. At this point in time, the vice presidency wasn't a big job. They kind of started a little bit in Washington, D.C., and then basically Roosevelt went on vacation for a while. So being thrown into the presidency, suddenly they are in the spotlight, they've got all the attention of the press on them. And as some people suggested that it might be weird or annoying, they weren't all enthusiastic about the spotlight they suddenly found themselves in. So in this presentation, I'll take you through a look at some of the primary sources we have from Roosevelt to his children, about his children, and just try to give you an idea about what it must have been like for Roosevelt's family to suddenly find themselves in the limelight as the nation's first family. So I'm going to start with Roosevelt's eldest child, his daughter Alice, who I pointed out here and who you can see. Alice Roosevelt was technically the last of President Roosevelt's children to actually arrive in the White House. She spent the first several weeks of her father's presidency with her aunt. But I think she would agree with maybe Andy that she ended up really liking kind of the limelight she found it and the increased publicity. 2 events I'm going to point out at the beginning of 1902 kind of illustrate the sort of situation she found herself in, and the Roosevelt family as a whole found themselves in, at the intersection of the private and the public. So, Theodore Roosevelt came to the presidency in the middle of September 1901. As etiquette dictated, the White House was in a mourning period for the last several months of the year, wearing, black armbands, kind of muted colors around the White House, not holding any large receptions or parties out of respect for the deceased William McKinley. With the new year, however, 1902, that brought an end to the period of mourning. And just a couple days later, after the traditional New Year's Day reception and a cabinet dinner, the Roosevelts hosted a major social function as Alice had her debutante ball. Now, I'm going to ask a question in the chat, or that you can answer in the chat, or if you want to unmute. How many of you have an idea what a debutante ball is, or have heard of the idea of a debutante before? Because I don't think I had when I was in elementary school or middle school. If you've heard of that before, you can give me a thumbs up if you're on camera, or if you want to type in the chat. I see Hazley Elementary has an idea. Yep. a couple more seconds. I'm trying to see. Miles has no idea. Excellent. Well, like I said, Edgewood Intermediary. Good, Andy. Don't know. Well, that's whether you do or don't, that's all right. I see a couple of people have an idea. The two ideas that there were a fancy dance and the first public appearance. And essentially that's right. A debutante ball was a big fancy party. Lots of people. Yep, when a young woman turns a certain age. Excellent. So lots of people, elaborate clothes, formal dances, that sort of thing. And it served as sort of a rite of passage, as Curtis said, when a young woman turned a certain age. As I said, Alice was 17, often it was 18. But it was kind of to introduce their daughters to high society, and kind of an indication at this time that they could then be married, perhaps. While newspapers covering the event noted that Alice's dance was, as it says here, an entirely personal affair, and it wasn't an official White House dinner. I mean, there weren't diplomats and things there. There were cabinet members, but it wasn't an official event. But as you can tell, probably by the newspaper articles, this wasn't necessarily a private event either. Other balls sometimes showed up in newspaper columns and whatnot, reporting on usually little kind of just, oh, this person had their coming out dance, this person had their debutante ball. But as you can see from the very long newspaper article I've got on the side over here, Alice's debutante ball attracted attention of papers across the country, and they published reports spanning multiple columns. As one paper noted here, Alice's debut into society promised to be a function of uncommon brilliancy and interest, the most notable event of its kind since Nellie Grant was a debutante at the White House 30 years ago. So it's not that this had never happened before, but 30 years is a long time. So this certainly hadn't happened for a while. And with Alice coming to the White House, this was a spectacle that the nation kind of caught wind of. Other papers talked about the dancing, the dresses, the attendees, as I mentioned, and most of all, Alice herself, describing her as tall and slender with the same coloring as her father and a profusion of pretty blonde hair, the ideal debutante. These sort of descriptions of Alice and her debutante ball ended up introducing Alice not only to society, but to the nation. Hey, Hazley Elementary, you're right. They made a big deal of this. A second major event featuring Alice, and also highlighting the Roosevelt family's newfound role on the public stage, took place just the next month. So that was early January 1902. This happened toward the end of February 1902. The German Emperor, Kaiser Wilhelm II, had commissioned a yacht from an American shipyard, which was nearing completion. Would it be possible, he wondered, for President Roosevelt's daughter Alice to christen the ship once it was completed? This would include ceremonies, smashing a bottle of champagne on the bow of the ship, officially naming it, launching it off into the water, those sorts of things. Roosevelt, in reply, told the emperor he would be delighted to have his daughter take part in the ceremonies. Communicating to the emperor by way of the German ambassador, in this letter here I've selected, that it was needless to express the pleasure which it will give me to have my daughter christen His Majesty's yacht, and presenting his hearty appreciation of the request. So with this reply, within the first kind of 2 months of 1902, Alice Roosevelt found herself taking her first steps on the international stage as well as the national. So she successfully christened the Meteor on February 25th, taking part in the ceremony surrounding the launch of the yacht. If you take a look at this picture here, so we've got some comments about the outfits already. You can see we've got President Roosevelt here. We've got a bunch of German dignitaries in those outfits, the kind of full military regalia. And here on the edge, we've got Alice holding a big bouquet of flowers. As you can see by the postcards down below, these ceremonies were also captured on commemorative postcards. So not only was this a single event out on the East Coast, kind of attended by the German nobility, this was printed and reprinted and shared across the nation and across I guess internationally. I don't know whether these went places other than Germany, but certainly outside the United States, Alice kind of had made a splash on the world stage. This would by no means be the last time that Alice stepped onto the international stage. Early in Roosevelt's second term of office, he sent Alice at the center of a goodwill mission to East Asia, stopping in the Philippines, Japan, Korea, and China, among other nations. So Alice had a tremendous presence both within the United States and internationally. This interest continued even when she became engaged to Congressman Nicholas Longworth. As you can see here, these are like full-page newspaper spreads talking about Alice's private life, putting that squarely in the public eye. As you can see, they've got sorry about that. As you can see, they've got portraits of Alice and her fiance. They've got speculation about how he might have proposed. Exactly, she's like a celebrity, just like Hazley Elementary said in the chat. Excellent. So the interest people had in Alice Roosevelt's life, both public and private aspects, led to many people reaching out, wishing to dedicate things to or name things after Princess Alice, as many people called her. As you can see from some of these notes we have in our digital library, these are essentially just kind of form letters sent out by William Lee, President Roosevelt's secretary, trying to discourage some of these people who wanted to name things after her, writing that owing to the great number of similar applications constantly received, Miss Roosevelt has felt obliged to discourage the dedication to herself of musical and literary compositions. Does anybody have any guesses how that went? Give me a thumbs up if you think they listened, thumbs down if you think a lot of things were still dedicated to her, or throw a message in the chat. See an Edgewood Intermediate, a lot of thumbs down, maybe a couple of thumbs up. There's a thumbs down in the chat. Excellent. I would say I will wait a couple more seconds. Intermediary, no. I'm gonna grab a quick drink of water while I see if any more answers are coming in. All right, looks like we're good. So if you guessed she still had a lot of things written in her honor, you'd be right. We've got just a couple selections here. These are from some of our collections with sheet music in particular. But even with the request to not dedicate musical or literary works to her, Alice was so much in the public eye, she had a huge number of things named after her. Some of them, as you can see from this one in the middle, respectively dedicated by permission to Miss Alice Roosevelt. So it's possible she gave permission for some of these things to be dedicated to her. But just there were a tremendous number of sheet music covers. There were also things like the postcards, like we saw earlier, French chocolate cards, kind of like early baseball cards. And she had a color named after her even, Alice Blue, kind of the color of her eyes, and the one that was used of her dress. And you can see that's the Alice Blue waltzes, Alice Blue folio. Why were people so obsessed with her? Like Hazley Elementary, I think you answered your own question up above. She was a celebrity. She was interesting. She enjoyed the publicity. She developed a reputation for driving fast in cars, for smoking, carrying around a garden snake named Emily Spinach, just these sort of outlandish things. And part of it was that not all of the Roosevelt's family was this enthused with the publicity. She was kind of being a little bit of a rebel, I think, by doing these things. So Alice stands on one extreme side of how Roosevelt's family kind of dealt with the publicity of being in the nation's eye. But of course, Roosevelt had 5 other children, all of whom had to deal with the pressures of balancing their private lives and the public attention of the nation. After Roosevelt assumed the presidency, the nation wanted to know everything it could about their president's family. leading to spreads like this, alongside an article, Mrs. Roosevelt and Her Children, published by Jacob Riis. This gave the readers of the Ladies' Home Journal a description of the Roosevelts' family life in the White House, and you can see focuses on each of the children in turn, with the article describing their appearance, their interests, and even their pets. Just kind of, let's see, use my laser pointer. So here we've got Archie, we've got Ted, or Theodore Roosevelt Jr., as he was. Alice again, we have Roosevelt's other daughter, Ethel, over here. Got Archie, got a couple pictures of Quentin here, Roosevelt's youngest, who I said was just barely 4 when he entered, when Roosevelt came to the presidency. We've got a couple of Archie and Quentin playing alongside policemen or playing with a camera. And then Roosevelt's other son, Kermit, here. So you can see, let me turn off that laser pointer now. So you can see they were interested in all these. They got just tried to learn as much as they could. It was just, there had been children in the White House before, like I said, but it had been a while, and it was never this big of a family. And Roosevelt was big and expressive and full of life, and people just wanted to know everything they could. With that being said, the author, Riis, who wrote this article, captures some of their reluctance to share everything of their private lives with the public. Riis was a friend of Theodore Roosevelt's from the days that Roosevelt was police commissioner in New York. And surely with the approval of the president, he included the sentiment of Roosevelt's eldest son, Ted, or Theodore Jr., who he writes, so this is Ted, put it succinctly at school when his chum dubbed him the first boy in the land. I wish, he said in deep disgust, this is Ted, that my father would soon be done holding office. I am sick and tired of the whole thing. And this is what he said at the very beginning of Roosevelt's first term. So while Alice was on one end, Ted so much was less enthused. So at the time of that article, Ted was still 14 and attending Groton, a private boarding school. But this sort of sentiment he had, kind of not wanting to be in the public eye, would carry forward even into the beginning of his college years at Harvard. Early in his first term at college, President Roosevelt wrote to the president of Harvard University to complain about the way reporters were treating Ted. Writing, I care less than nothing about what they do or say about me, for I am entirely competent to defend myself, and I am past the stage where they can do any material damage. But it is perfectly possible for them to create in the mind of Ted's fellow college boys an opinion about Ted, which will go far towards seriously interfering with the enjoyment and the profit of his college career. Basically saying Roosevelt didn't care what the press said about him. He's old enough, he can handle it. But being concerned about the publicity and kind of the media attention giving Ted, that it could hurt how much he enjoyed college, how much he was able to learn. He continued a little bit further, even condemning the unspeakable vulgarity of the press and the offense against good taste, which they committed in their reporting. Writing to Ted, on the other side of my slide here, Roosevelt advised him to go on just as you have evidently been doing. Attract as little attention as possible. Do not make a fuss about the newspapermen, camera creatures, and idiots generally, letting it be seen that you do not like them and avoid them, but not letting them betray you into any excessive irritation. The situation, as you might be able to guess from these letters, was that reporters and photographers were trailing behind Ted wherever he went, whether he was going to class, heading to the library to study, playing on the Harvard football team, or just living in his room on campus. Hazel Elementary, I think you're right. He's lucky social media didn't exist yet. This is even before that. As the media called out to Ted to try to get a comment from him or make him turn so they could get a picture, they generally just made themselves a nuisance for him and others on campus, leading to Roosevelt's sort of concern for his son. There was a mention of social media not existing yet. Even the term paparazzi didn't exist until the 1960s. But the idea of the paparazzi, as you can see, certainly existed. Here we've got a political cartoon that I was a little slow in trying to get sent out. But I'm going to tell you a little bit about it. But before I do, I thought I'd give you all a chance to look at it and tell me what you notice. If you think of something interesting, or if you have an idea of what it's showing, we'll see if you can unmute your microphone or if you can type it in the chat. Just if you notice anything about this cartoon. As you can see, the title is "The President and His Family Are in Oyster Bay, Seeking Rest and Privacy." I'm going to grab, I see a hand raised from Edgewood Intermediate. I don't know if.
Yeah, go ahead, Edgewood.
Yeah. I see Kermit caught croup.
Yep, Kermit caught the croup. You see it's kind of coming out of a megaphone up on top of the house. Excellent. Paisley Elementary, I see lots of media. Yep. I'm going to grab another drink of water while we see if we have any more. Oh, Edgewood, yep, keep going.
There's somebody up there. The bottom
Yep. Excellent, excellent. Edgewood, go ahead.
It says Alice at the bottom, like near. It says Alice. It posted about Alice.
Sure, you can see you've got a couple of things here talking about Alice down there. Also here, if you're able to read it. All right, excellent. So a lot of good observations there. Multiple people writing newspapers. Yep, good observation from Edgewood. So the house you can see here represents Sagamore Hill, President Roosevelt's home in Oyster Bay, New York, where he frequently traveled to during the summers instead of staying in Washington, D.C. If you look closely, we've got a couple people with names down here. We've got Alice carrying a parasol here. We've got Ethel playing in the sandbox, Ted and Kermit playing with probably Archie and Quentin, so all of Roosevelt's sons there. I believe this is Roosevelt himself over in a hammock. But as a couple people pointed out, everyone else, there's just a lot of newspaper reporters trying to get an idea of what's going on at Sagamore Hill and trying to make this just kind of summer day into news. You can see the artist drew newspaper reporters hiding in bushes. Let me bring that up. To hiding in bushes, climbing up trees and on ladders, climbing up onto the top of the house. Somebody mentioned Kermit caught the croup being kind of broadcasted. You see they've even set up kind of a loudspeaker up there. They've got people in the hot air balloon. And as Paisley Elementary just pointed out in the chat, the news they're getting isn't exactly big news, I would say. Alice is slowly but surely becoming sunburned. Kermit caught the croup. That's kind of like a cold. Kermit caught a cold, essentially, is what that one's saying. Alice wore pink today. So I always like looking at political cartoons like this because they're a really interesting window into topics. Because imagine you've got kind of the base layer, just what it is, a cartoon showing Sagamore Hill and all the reporters, kind of poking fun at the reporters, even looking in everywhere, reporting on these just little tiny details. Then above that, you've got kind of a self-referential layer, where this cartoon about newspapers and newspaper reporters is being printed in those same newspapers, making the reporting itself kind of be a news. And then above that, you've got the person actually reading this, just looking for any news about Roosevelt. So they're reading the stories and they're reading the political cartoon. And they're just the entire reason that this sort of reporting goes on is just people were interested. So I always like political cartoons because you get kind of those separate layers of things. Right, Paisley, it's pretty boring news, but there were newspaper columns and things about some of the Roosevelt children getting sick. There were some details like this. Alice wore a perfect blue dress. So they did make news out of some of these little facts. That being said, I do want to point out that this cartoon was an exaggeration. I don't think at any point there were people up on the roof of Sagamore Hill broadcasting the news. Both President Roosevelt and his wife, Edith Kermit Roosevelt, worked to keep their kids from being in the eye of the press too much, and to try to let them have normal childhoods. Because of the documents we have, though, in the Theodore Roosevelt Center's collections, we can also get a little view of this more private side of the Roosevelts' lives, which show us that even though Theodore Roosevelt was president, had all this publicity on him, his family still had a lot of concerns that normal people had. So jumping off from my mention of Ted earlier and moving to Roosevelt's next eldest son, Kermit Roosevelt, one of the big discussions that has come up in some of the letters I've been working with personally recently, that I've been cataloging and reading through and trying to describe, has been about Kermit's going to school. In 1906, Kermit was still attending school at Groton, that private boarding school I mentioned earlier, but he had begun to think about trying to move on to college. Indicate Peabody of Groton, kind of one of the headmasters there, wrote to Roosevelt in March 1906 that he was a little afraid that as Kermit likes to emulate Ted and other things, so he might be anxious to follow his example in cutting off a year of preparation for college at school. How many of you have a little sibling who likes to try to do everything you do? Or how many of you have an older sibling and you try to prove you can do everything that they did? I see a lot of hands coming up. So even though they were the sons and daughters of the president, the Roosevelt children experienced this sort of relationship between themselves just as much as any other family. So Peabody's saying that he thinks Kermit's going to try to do what Ted did. Jumping forward a little, we see in a letter from President Roosevelt to Kermit that Kermit was in fact considering leaving Groton early. He writes, Roosevelt writes to Kermit that he is sorry you feel as you do about leaving Groton, but if you definitely make up your mind, I shall not refuse. He promises later on in the letter to do all I can to help you find the right type of tutor and to help you study so that you can get into Harvard. But he warns that you will have to make up your mind in the first place that you will work as hard as you know how in order to get into Harvard. And in the next place that you will have to work like a beaver even if you do get in order to stay in. So this letter places our focus on Roosevelt himself as a father, trying to advise his son on the future, trusting his son's judgment and promising to help however he can, but kind of advising, well, maybe you want to think about this. While he promises to get Kermit the right tutor, this letter makes it clear that Roosevelt, even though he's president, even though his son's the son of the president, he's holding his son to a high standard, making it clear that Kermit will get, whether Kermit gets into Harvard or not, will be based on his own merits. In a later letter, Roosevelt kind of continues on this train of thought, writing that I think both Ted and Kermit have felt it a point of honor to enter college at the age I did. While Ted and Kermit may have felt this point of honor whether or not Roosevelt was president, it seems likely that Roosevelt being president kind of pushed them to internalize kind of a drive for themselves, increased the pressure on them to perform and make names for themselves. So even though this is entirely within the private life of the Roosevelts, Roosevelt's being president kind of still has an impact on their life, even though this might not have been shown to the people, to the public at large. It's still having an impact, just Roosevelt being in the position he is. Roosevelt comments later in the same letter, I shall take precious good care that the next two, talking about Archie and Quentin, shall have that point of honor taken well out of their minds before they start at Groton, which I think suggests that Roosevelt probably feels some regret at kind of the extreme high standards his elder sons wanted to hold themselves to. Before I move on, I should mention that Kermit ended up taking his father's advice and not trying to graduate from Groton early, a decision which Roosevelt and his wife strongly praised their son, saying he's confident that he's acted in the right way. He's acted like a trump in addition to acting wisely. And as something that I enjoy, I am good to stand any kind of spree you want to embark on. So he thinks that Kermit did the right thing and he's like, all right, we can just, You can have a party, a celebration. I'll support you because you've made a good choice. A trump. If you've played like a card game or like hearts or something like that, there's a trump suit, which is just kind of the winning suit. You've done a great thing. I hope that answers your question, Hazley Elementary. I think you've acted in a good way. You've made a good choice. Now, I've talked about Roosevelt's 3 oldest children, but he had 3 other kids as well. We've got Ethel, Archie, and Quentin. These 3 being younger tend not to have the same volume of letters written to them, because especially in the early years of Roosevelt's presidency, they lived in the White House with him instead of being off at school. Because of this, a lot of letters we have that Roosevelt wrote to them are from when Roosevelt himself was off on trips around the country, or while he was in Washington, D.C. and they had gone up on vacation or back to Sagamore Hill. While we don't have as many of these letters, they're fun to look at, because in contrast to some of the letters that he wrote to the older children, we see Roosevelt drew some picture letters, as he called them. Here we can see a letter to Quentin. He was talking about the little birds in the nest in the vines on the garden fence, and he drew the mother bird feeding its chicks. And kind of, I was out walking the other day and went to the zoo and fed the elk. And again, a picture there. In this letter to Ethel, meanwhile, we can see several different pictures. A couple. This is supposed to be Ethel with Archie and Quentin, which might give you a little picture into that. But also Roosevelt playing tennis. But three images that I want to point out here, because it kind of leads into my next topic. Ethel giving medicine to a horse, a dog chasing a squirrel, and a policeman feeding a squirrel. And I mentioned those 3 in particular because they show an important point I want to touch on before I wrap up, before I come to the end. The Roosevelts and the presence of animals and their pets. Now, it's pretty common in the present day for presidents to have pets. Often a dog, sometimes a cat. President Biden has had both in his time in office. I believe he's had several dogs and he has a cat now. But the Roosevelts had a few more exotic pets while they were in the White House. So if I can go back to this picture for a second, which I used earlier, you'll see several of these pictures feature pets quite prominently. We've got this picture here of Ted. You can see he's holding let me pull up that laser pointer again. You can see he's got a macaw on his hand, a parrot. Here we've got Alice with a little dog. We have Kermit with an entirely different dog. And over here, Quentin riding a miniature pony. So as you can probably guess, pets played a large role in the Roosevelt household. Here I have a letter from Roosevelt to Archie that he wrote on a trip he took all the way across the United States to the West Coast. Did the pony live at the White House? I'm going to talk about that in a little bit, so hold on to that thought. I'm gonna come back. He starts this letter to Archie talking a little bit about the trip he is on and the landscape he is traveling through before writing, I have a number of treasures to divide among you children when I get back. One of the treasures is Bill the lizard. He is a little live lizard called a horned frog, very cunning, who lives in a small box. The little badger, Josh, is very well and eats milk and potatoes. So while I don't remember reading other letters with Bill the lizard too much in the future, Josiah the badger, or Josh as Roosevelt calls him, was indeed a pet at the White House for some time. Here we've got Archie holding Josh, and he lived in the White House for a good while before he eventually was donated to the zoo because of his tendency to bite people's ankles. Which maybe gives you an idea of what life at the White House was like. maybe the most fun pet story that comes up has to do with the pony earlier, who Hazley Elementary asked about. The pony Algonquin did indeed live at the White House. So although you've got Quentin writing it here, the Algonquin, the pony, technically belonged to Archie Roosevelt. And Algonquin, Archie really loved his pony. He spent a lot of time with him. He rode him all that he could. He was good at riding. In the spring of 1903, though, Archie caught the measles and was sick in bed and couldn't see his pony. Eventually, he started to feel better and asked if he could go out of his room to see the pony. But Edith said his mother said it was still too soon. He should stay in bed until he's all better. Now, here's where the story, I have to admit, gets a little fuzzy. In the retellings, it's sometimes Quentin who has this next idea. Sometimes it's Kermit. In this newspaper article, it says it's the groom, one of the people who looked after the pony. I haven't been able to find letters saying it was Quentin or Kermit. So I would probably go with the newspaper article. This was printed at the time of this happening, being the groom. But whoever it was, someone got the idea that if Archie couldn't go see Algonquin, they'd just have to bring Algonquin to him. So what happened is that the groom, Charles the groom, snuck the pony into the White House, eventually slipping him on the elevator, bringing him all the way up to Archie's room on the second floor of the White House, and making this, as the newspaper pointed out, the first time that a horse has ridden in a White House elevator. So yes, the Algonquin the pony did live, I believe at this time the White House had stables, so it usually lived at the stables of the White House, but had some adventures even within the White House. The fact that this was reported in newspapers brings us back around again to the notion that while the Roosevelts may have wished for privacy, in many cases their personal life was nevertheless squarely in the public eye. I'd like to kind of wrap up my presentation with this image of a postcard, which, if you remember back to the beginning of my presentation, is the same picture, but this time proclaiming the family to be pride of our nation. President Roosevelt and family. And I think this is just kind of a good way to wrap it up, to get at the idea that I was trying to bring up here, kind of between the personal family portrait on one hand, and on the other hand, that same portrait being turned into a postcard. So I hope through the various primary sources I've pulled from the Theodore Roosevelt Center's collections, I've also helped you think a little bit about what it must have been like for this family to suddenly find themselves facing the entire nation, and maybe made you wonder what it would be like for you. As I kind of asked at the beginning, would you relish the publicity and take advantage of being in the nation's spotlight like Alice? Or would you be uncomfortable with people watching your every move and try to ignore them like Ted? In either case, I think we can all agree it would be a big change to have so much attention all at once. So thank you very much for your attention and for letting me talk to you today. If you're ever interested in checking out what other sorts of letters and documents the Theodore Roosevelt Center has, you can find us here at theodorerooseveltcenter.org, where you can search our collections, read some encyclopedia articles about Theodore Roosevelt, or send us messages with the Contact Us button, which I've shown how to find here. You go to About Us and then Contact Us, and you can send us an email. If you have any questions, like I said, we always love to answer them. I'll leave this up for a little bit, but we've got some time left. So if anybody has questions about things that came up in my presentation or just about Theodore Roosevelt in general, I'll do my best to answer those. I suppose I can stop sharing my screen and I'll bring it back up if anybody needs. Was there a lot of press about his wife? Good question, Hazley Elementary. Edith, his wife, was probably the least talked about Roosevelt. There were people commenting on kind of her thrift. She was kind of known for like trying to not spend a lot on dresses, kind of paying attention to that. But Edith, while Roosevelt himself loved the publicity, his wife was, I would say, probably a bit more shy, more reserved. So she tried to stay out of the press more. One of the things that kind of comes up in documents sometimes or in books is that during this time, kind of a pithy saying was that a woman's name should only show up in the newspaper twice, once when she get married and once when she dies. And I think Edith was kind of that mentality of trying to stay out of the press. Did Theodore have the most kids out of any president? I don't believe so. I'm not sure off the top of my head. That's a good question. He certainly had a lot of children, and he promoted having big families. He wanted lots of people to have kids. He enjoyed seeing large children. He received lots of letters. Did any of the kids attend the dinner with Booker T. Washington? That is an excellent question. I don't believe so. For those of you not knowing what that is, Booker, at the beginning of Roosevelt's presidency, Roosevelt invited Booker T. Washington, a prominent African-American kind of statesman, to have dinner with him. And at this time, that just wasn't done. This was the first time that an African-American had dined with the president at the time, and it caused a whole big stir in the press. The southern states kind of went wild, kind of denouncing Roosevelt and things. But it was liked in many of the northern states, so it was just a big media circus then. How many pets did Theodore Roosevelt have? Oh, that's a good question. I don't know the exact number off the top of my head. As you saw, there were several dogs, cats, lizards. Kermit there's a story of Kermit pulling out some like little mice at the dinner table that he had as pets. Little hopping mice, and then kind of sneaking them away. Ted had birds. So while I don't have a number, I can tell you that there were a bunch. In addition to just horses, Roosevelt was an avid rider of horses. He had several different kind of going off through Rock Creek Park, which is kind of near in Washington, D.C., jumping things. Did Alice say her father always had to be the center of attention? There is a quote, I believe, he had to be the bride at every wedding and the corpse at every funeral. I think that's a quote from her, that yes, Alice did say her father always had to be the center of attention. Edgewood Intermediate, I see your hand. Thank you for waiting. You can unmute.
Is any of Theodore Roosevelt's relatives alive today?
Are any of Theodore Roosevelt's relatives alive today? Yes. There are, I don't remember what generation of Theodore Roosevelt we're on, but so Theodore Roosevelt is actually Theodore Roosevelt Jr. properly. His father was Theodore Roosevelt. There's Theodore Roosevelt, there's Ted, and going down, there are several, a good number of Theodore Roosevelt's descendants still alive today. Yes, good question. Andy asked, when did he die? Theodore Roosevelt died in 1919. January 6th, 1919. Let me see what other questions I missed. Let's see. I liked the picture of Edith and the other children. Good. I like that picture too.
I think you got the rest. Oh, here's one.
Did Theodore Roosevelt regret urging his sons to enter World War I after Quinton was killed? That is a good question, and I think it's a difficult question to answer. So for those of you who don't know, when it came to World War I, President Roosevelt really urged kind of preparation, going across into Europe. He hated that Germany invaded Belgium. He really wanted to defend them, and he pushed his sons hard to go fight in the war, kind of to live up to what he himself had done. Roosevelt fought in the Spanish-American War back in 1898, I believe, and pushed his sons to also serve in the military. And while Ted and Archie were injured in the war, Quinton actually flew an airplane, and Quinton was killed in combat. And I think, did Roosevelt regret urging his sons? I don't think he regretted urging his sons to enter the war. I think he's still held up to the idea that this was the right thing to do. I think he was certainly sad that Quinton died. It came toward the end of his life, and it kind of broke his heart that it happened. But I think overall, he still believed that was the right thing to do, was to try to push, to fight for the right to to go off and try and defend liberty as he considered it. I see another question from Edgewood Intermediate. Thank you for raising your hand. You can unmute.
How did Theodore Roosevelt die?
How did he die? He died in his sleep. He died. He just got old. He had lived a hard life. After his presidency, he went first on a safari, and then later he went for an adventure in the Amazon. He went down what's called the River of Doubt. He had got malaria there, which kind of never left him after that. It was a very difficult journey. He had just gotten old. He had some problems with his eye. He boxed while he was in the White House. I didn't get to bring that up, but he boxed for fun. He had some like naval aides kind of come in and spar with him. He did jujitsu and things like that. But at one point he got knocked on the side of his head and had lost sight in one of his eyes. So he had just lived a rough and tumble life, and he got old. He ended up passing away in his sleep. And I think there's a quote, I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was essentially that like death had to take him sleeping or else there would have been a fight. Did Roosevelt have a personal pet apart from his children? I don't know that, let's see. So when he went hunting, there was a little dog called Skip that I think he got in Colorado. And that was a pet of Roosevelt's for some time, but of the whole family. Roosevelt had several horses. As I mentioned, he loved riding horses, going jumping with them over gates and things. Trying to think if there were any other pets, but those are the two kind of things that stand out, Andy. I hope that kind of answers your question.
All right. Well, if there are no other questions, I just want to take this opportunity to thank everyone for attending. It was so great to have you. We loved your participation. And Eric, just thank you. Thank you so much for all this really fascinating information and for your presentation. We really appreciate your time and all the knowledge you shared with us.
Awesome. Well, thank you. This is always fun to do. I'm just going to share my screen again 1 second to make sure. If there are any further questions, like I said, you can find us at theodorerooseveltcenter.org. Just shoot us a question with the contact us email, and I will do my best to get you an answer. As I said, we always love getting the contact us questions from researchers, from students, from anyone, and we always try to do our best. But this has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you all for coming. It's been great.